Really delighted to welcome you to our webinar this morning. Just to make you aware, there are closed captions available during the webinar, so please click on the closed captions button to enable these at the bottom of your screen. So the focus for today is to explore the role that family hubs can and could play in supporting families where attendance is a barrier and not a hurdle. As models of interagency working, family hubs can also play an important role in the ecosystem around a child or young person. Today is a space for looking forward and thinking creatively in a way I know that many of you already do day to day, whether you have a child who finds school attendance difficult or whether you are someone who works to support a family where attendance is a challenge. Can we click on the next slide, please? So we're going to hear from an amazing group of people this morning who've given of their time, so thank you so much. And they've built their knowledge through work and experience, and you'll hear there about their work and about their life stories as well, their life experience. So we know that this is a journey full of emotion for many, and we will hear the voices that reflect this. And I would ask that we use the question and answer function to stay focused on the topic of the webinar. And to be respectful of the language that we use. I'm very aware that we may not always use the right words for the right time, but if we don't, then please share your preferences kindly and let us know that in the best possible way. So depending on time, there will be a panel of questions, and any we don't answer, I will ensure that we reply to those after the event as well, and those will be published. So we're really looking forward to that. Just to let you know a little bit about myself, so I am the regional implementation advisor for all of the local authorities in the south of England, but prior to that, some of you may know that I was a head teacher for 30 years, so attendance and schools and relationships and families are very much at the heart of what is important as well to me, and wanting to really explore this space with the family hubs with whom I work and with whom we work across England. So next slide, please. I was in a I have to thank Alex Quigley for this from the EEF, from the Education Endowment Fund, because I was in a webinar with him last week, and he talked about how it shouldn't be either or, but it should be and together. And I thought I've got to steal that, I've got to magpie that, because for me that's what it's about. This is a conversation that can be very binary, it can be very divisive and divided, and for me, thinking about family hubs, this is a way of really building on that and together, and hopefully we will find some really useful conversation today to support that. Next slide, please. Next slide, thank you, and click. Thank you. So many of you will have been around when we talked about, holding on to the baton, that just sort of wanting to pass the baton really quickly and changing that to holding the baton. And I suppose I want to think, click again, please, possibly. But the second image is now hidden, is really about a crew on a yacht, and it's really about everybody having their own roles and responsibilities and the importance of coming together as a team. And I really see that as a space that we can explore today, as how everyone can be part of that team in supporting families. So it's my pleasure now to welcome Zara Ahmed and Molly Mayer. They're both from the DFE. Zara works in the Family Hubs and Early Years Intervention team, and Molly in the Vulnerable Children's Attendance team. So thank you so much for joining us today. Over to you.
Hi, thanks very much, Julie. So as Julie said, my name is Molly Mayer, and I work in the attendance division at the Department for Education. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Great. So you may have recently seen the department's Moments Matter Attendance Counts campaign, and if not, it's conveniently over my shoulder. This campaign is focused on avoidable days of absence, so the days here and there that children take off with the sniffles or to go away for a long weekend that add up over time. And it was created in response to evidence that parental attitudes to the importance of regular attendance have changed since the pandemic. And while this applies to many families, we know, of course, that other children and families face more complex barriers to school attendance. And in fact, that many parents would love for their children to attend school more often, but it's not as simple as sending them in when they have a cold. And instead, they need more multi-agency support around them. And so this is where the department's working together to improve attendance guidance, and our support first approach comes in. And so you may have seen last Thursday, actually, that we published a new version of the guidance and announced that it will become statutory from August of this year. And what the guidance does is it really recognizes that persistent absence, so missing more than 10% of school, is almost always a symptom of complex, wider issues in a pupil's life, and that barriers to attendance are often specific to local contexts. And it gives local authorities a strategic role in facilitating this wider support need of children and their families, and taking this support first approach, as we say, so not penalizing from the start, but looking and understanding what families and children need to be able to attend school as much as possible. And a lot of the guidance focuses on what schools are required to do, but it also includes expectations on local authorities, including to provide multidisciplinary support for families on attendance, aligning support routes, and having a school attendance support team that coordinates the range of services in the LA, including family hubs. And regular communication between Family Hub leadership and your area school attendance support team can help to ensure that families receive the right support. So I'm now going to hand over to Zara to say more about this.
Thank you, Molly. So my name's Zara and I work on Family Hub's policy at the Department for Education. So building on from what Molly has said, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the role Family Hubs can play in supporting families to overcome complex barriers to attendance. So every professional that interacts with a child or young person of school age or their family has a role to play to help them to attend school regularly. And Family Hub staff can play a role in this effort as part of the Making Every Contact Count approach embedded in the Family Hub model framework. Recognising the value of attendance, the framework emphasises the need for collaboration between Family Hubs and education partners, ensuring there's a clear route to connect families to support, including for attendance support. So Family Hub professionals are well placed to meet with families and discuss attendance, and Family Hub professionals can support families to overcome some of those complex barriers. And I'm going to touch on a few examples and ways of possibly doing that. So the first one is meeting and coordinating with the school attendance team at the local authority. And this is to share intelligence and ensure families receive the right support at the right time. And that's because, as we know, the hub approach means professionals and partners working together more effectively to benefit families. Discussing attendance and barriers families are facing as part of routine interactions at the Family Hub is another example. So this could include encouraging parents, carers, children and young people to share any difficulties they might be facing that could impact attendance. And of course, there's also offering resources for improving attendance. For example, that could be signposting families to the Is My Child Too Ill for School NHS guidance, and that can help parents, carers with making judgments on when their child is too unwell to attend school. So those are just some of the ways that Family Hub professionals can join the wider effort to support families to overcome complex barriers to attendance. And I know you'll be hearing a bit more about that throughout this session. In sum, by providing families with the necessary resources, guidance and support, and working closely with the school attendance team, Family Hub staff can play a crucial role in fostering school attendance and helping children achieve their full potential. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass back to Julie.
That's great. Thank you so much, Zara and Molly, and really helpful for you to set that that picture at the start of this webinar as well. So I know you're both busy, so you're going to zip off now, but thank you so much for joining us at the start. I should also just say that the chat function is disabled during this webinar. So if you have any questions, then please submit them via the question and answer function, which should be on the bottom of your screen. There is also the option to upvote any popular questions within that as well. Please know that you will not be able to ask any questions anonymously during this webinar as well. So please pop your name in there as well. The webinar will be recorded and available on Anna Freud's YouTube channel. And if you have any technical issues, please put these in the Q&A function, and a member of the Anna Freud Centre will be able to assist you straight away. So great, thank you very much, all of you now who've been able to join us. And I'm going to pass on with with no ado to Margaret Mulholland, who is the SEND and Inclusion Policy Specialist at the Association of School and College Leaders. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Julie, and it's lovely to be here today. And I'm just going to share really some of the work that schools are currently doing around attendance, some of what we think is working, some of what we'd like to see work better, and also just some trends really. What do we see that we ought to be doing more of as we go forward in the future? So I hope it's helpful. The Association of School and College Leaders represents 25,000 school leaders across England, Wales, Scotland and Ireland, Northern Ireland. So just really a sense of what work is going on and how it's being shared. I think it's really important. I put a picture there of Pepe Diaslo, who is going to be our General Secretary of ASCL this year. And he features his school, Wales High School, which is actually in Rotherham, not in Wales, but Wales High School features in some of the images that I'm going to use today. This first one is a nice example. So some of the things that we're seeing schools really focusing hard on in relation to supporting attendance and supporting belonging in school is strengthening the ethos, that sense of belonging and that clarity around purpose of all staff and all parents in the community as to what we're all about and why school's important. And I think in terms of that climate, schools like Wales are really looking at which groups are more susceptible to feeling disengaged, which schools are more susceptible to seeing those barriers appear on a daily basis and thinking about how they address those. It's not perfect, it's not always consistent, and that's something that we really are wanting to strengthen, that consistency of approach. But just showing here the Odd Socks Day that starts Anti-Bullying Week at Wales High School. They have groups who support anybody who feels vulnerable during the day, or anybody who feels that perhaps their best friend isn't in school today and needs somebody else to join up with. There's very explicit groupings around that. And many schools are adopting those sorts of policies. The other and approaches, how can schools help is obviously the really key question as well. Active listening and proactive action. Be kind, understand masking. Think about the way we talk to young people, what language we use. And being really clear. I think often schools are heard to talk about data, but when we talk about data, that sounds terribly impersonal. Data is important for showing patterns, but personalizing and building stronger relationships, thinking about those children who are invisible is again something that I think is proactively being developed, both through data, but also through that student voice, that parent voice that's being encouraged. Another picture from Wales High School of the deliberate groupings that they use, their diversity groups, that they use to really strengthen activity within the school, to shape practice and to shape policy. Also, I like this, particularly the role of ambassadors. And the reason I like it, it's not unusual, it's not new, but the reason I like it in the way it's used at Wales particularly is that training is given to young ambassadors for different groups, for different purposes, but actually they train with teachers. And then if young people want to talk to somebody about something they're worried about, or they want to ask for support, they can ask either a student or a teacher. So that empowerment and that respect is built in. I think often what we hear, and we hear too much, is the sort of this message about trust is broken between schools and families. And that's that's really important, that we just don't go with those headline messages. I think nationally there is a picture of that kind that reflects that. But locally, there's an awful lot of good work happening, and that binary approach is really not very helpful. So thinking about how we build back trust is something we should be doing, whether those headlines are there or not. And I think that communication is key. Communication between schools and families, between and across communities, but also at a national level. This advert, as was mentioned earlier, has been removed now because it didn't appeal to all families and this DFE marketing. But it was well intended, but it wasn't sufficiently nuanced. And I think the one size fits all challenge means that we really have to think about what nuanced messaging means. And rather than overwhelm families, many schools are telling us now that we did use the amber rag rated attendance to try and help families understand the impact of missing school. But actually that was overwhelming, it felt aggressive. And so many have moved forward from that and are much more focused now on offering support and encouragement. So Lego therapy, I've been in school yesterday where Lego therapy was so popular. They were hugely in demand. And message there from Newham local authority at New Year, you know, for some people that might be too much, saying we're here for you in terms of reminders about coming back to school in January. For others, it's encouraging. So how do we get that nuance? And how, as Julie said earlier, do we challenge all barriers? So I think, again, schools are thinking harder now, not just about let's have parents in for a coffee morning, or let's work with our family support worker to connect with those families who are struggling to get their young person into school. Actually, we're looking harder at the curriculum and the systems and processes within school that can get in the way of learning. Seem to go. And I think this fits with this diagram, which I've used before, and it's well, there's two for Bronfenbrenner and some work from Mel Ainscough, really showing us how our community can impact our engagement with school as a young person and as an adult. But what I wanted to point out is that I think policies and evidence bases are now supporting some of these equitable theories. So the Bronfenbrenner model and the Ainscough model show us how our community needs strengthening and engagement if we're going to really support young people at the centre. Well, the SEND guidance report from the Education Endowment Foundation uses that as a means of encouraging schools to look at their SEN and inclusion strategies. So it really understands that relational strength in improving support for young people with SEND. And equally, many of our schools and school leaders tell us that the mental health guidance, the guidance on attendance, considering mental health and well-being, has been really helpful in supporting their thinking about engaging better with community. I wanted to give an example of how we're learning. So as an association, we've worked much more closely over the last 2 years with virtual school heads. And the reasons that we've done that is that we can learn from the virtual school head teachers, because we're a community of leaders, school leaders, but how virtual schools wrap around support, how they work with health, how they work with families, how they work with social care. So that modelling for the wider leadership community, I think, is really important. So the National Association of Virtual School Heads and the Attachment Research Community are two communities that we're working with really closely, really to help the wider community of school leaders learn. And then it would be really important for us to acknowledge attendance hubs. I think there was a lot of anxiety about attendance hubs when they were first introduced. And it's fair to say that they are very varied, and that's probably a positive thing. They represent various communities of schools in localities. But I think, for example, here, Tim Coulson, who's one of our members, the CEO of Unity Partnership, talks about the fact that, not one size fits all, but also the aim is not to tell schools how to work on attendance, but to support them and to really make school a place that young people want to be. What are schools doing in that wraparound support where family hubs could really underpin? They're already employing independently where they can afford to. I was in a school yesterday that has employed a speech and language therapist, family support worker, but really, really would like to employ a school nurse and can't afford to at the moment. How can we collaborate in order to achieve better working and wraparound? And then slightly back to the point I was making before about curriculum. I think in driving forward teaching and learning and inclusion in schools, one of the things that I'm seeing happening with some of the schools that I'm working with closely is that they're recognizing the need to shift culture to be more inclusive and use language to do that. And so it might not always be perfect. It might not be the same in one school to another, but in their vision for making their school more inclusive and helping create a better sense of belonging, they're using language change and shift to really move culture and ethos forward. And that can be through the curriculum. And many schools are working on what we really consider the sort of stretch in what's ordinarily available. And I think that's where family hubs could really support. What we mean by that is the everyday teaching and learning that every child has access to should be more and more accessible. We can only do that through collaborative working with others, with other organisations and with other mediums. So in that ambition, I think schools are really understanding the need to stretch the ordinarily available, as Amelie Thompson says, to really include more young people into the everyday life of school that they feel that they can access effectively and happily, and that will give them that sense of belonging. So lots of things to think about, lots of new trends, if you like, particularly around curriculum, but I think lots of positive work happening, nowhere near there yet, but on the journey to belonging.
Margaret, thank you. That was amazing as always. And I think for me, what was striking me throughout is those I suppose there's links with family hubs. So family hubs at their very heart have access, connections, and relationships. And certainly, you were talking so much about relationships, the importance of that, about belonging, which is very much about feeling connected, feeling the people like me. But also, I really liked you were talking about the school where the pupils trained with the teachers, and that's something that I really think there is a space in family hubs to be looking at that joint training for better awareness, better understanding, written by families, with families, with school staff, as well as early help or family hub staff alongside. So that was so much resonance in there, and do stay with us as well. For some Q&As a little bit later. So if you do have any questions for our panel, please pop them into the question and answer space. Next, we're going to watch a short video from our parent participation advisor. So Dina Kosharek is not able to be with us today, unfortunately, but we're really pleased that she's been able to share her lived experience with her children. So hopefully the video will start shortly.
Hello, I'm Dina Kosharek, and my topic today is when a child is unable to go to school. I'm the parent participation advisor at the National Center for Family Hubs and an adoptive parent of 2 teenage girls. What some children struggle with. I have several children who have struggled with school attendance in my immediate and my wider family. These children have struggled with going into school due to many different problems. We've lived through separation anxiety, bullying, assault, mental health crises, a complete inability to focus, functional neurological disorders like tics and seizures, and dissociation so severe that my child became unresponsive. My children are scared of experiencing these problems in school and of being filmed and going viral. So my children have good reasons to be anxious about going to school, and that's something that's important to keep in mind. It's not that they don't want to go, they can't. Their lives have been dangerous and scary, and school hasn't always been a safe place for them. In fact, school has massively contributed to my children's poor mental health. What parents struggle with. Parents of children who struggle to go to school have a lot on their plates. I, for instance, manage my children's health problems, which involves regularly communicating with 10 to 12 professionals and attending appointments pretty much weekly. I try to make good weather at the school and explain what's going on, and I homeschool one of my daughters who no longer can go to school due to the severity of her health problems. Homeschooling is a nice and tidy word for something that's highly complicated and difficult. On top of all that, my children and I document their health problems daily, so we know if certain medications work and how symptoms develop. We read books together to better understand the issues, and I take courses. As a parent, it can be very difficult to decide whether to push a child to go into school or to keep them home. Looking back, I think I should have kept one of my daughters home more often. She's recently been diagnosed with PTSD due to what happened to her at a school. My other daughter often refuses to go in because she feels it just adds to her stress and anxiety. She's a teenager. There's no way I can make her go. That in turn makes me stressed and worried. What impact will this have on their future? What will their future look like? My husband and I oscillate between understanding, desperation, anger, and hope. So in order for children like mine to be able to go to school, schools need to be flexible and accommodate our children's needs. But it's difficult to know what to ask for. What accommodations can schools make? What support can I expect? Also, I don't see my daughters at school, so I don't know what they're like there. Advocating for my children is tricky because as parents, we need to keep teachers on our side. There's a power imbalance. What teachers struggle with. Schools, on the other hand, have to keep attendance figures high, so they're under pressure too. And teachers need to teach lessons, so there's only so much they can do. The system is not set up for children like mine. In my experience, teachers know little about individual students due to data protection, time constraints, and the size of schools. They're also often not trained to deal with children with complex needs. We've come across teachers who really wanted to help, but just didn't know how. Others, fortunately the minority, made things worse. They fall for children's perfect masking of their problems and think something must be wrong at home because at school, they're fine, when actually they're not. Many children hold it together at school as much as they can and fall apart at home where they feel safe. One teacher thought my child was controlling and might turn into a bully, when in fact she felt highly unsafe in his class and became controlling to feel safer. She ended up bedwetting several times each night for a few months because her anxiety was so high. She never bedwet before and immediately stopped once she got a different teacher, and she never bedwet again. Again, there are many fantastic teachers who try to be as flexible as possible and who really support children. But it's very hard to imagine for them how bad things can be at home if they don't see it in front of themselves. In an ideal world, teachers would take parents seriously, listen to what they say, and take it on board. However, that's difficult because here, teachers are being asked to believe what they're told rather than what they see with their own eyes. And that, of course, is counterintuitive. However, this constant masking is draining for children and parents, and in my case, caused severe problems that became visible at school at some point. What can family hubs do to help? I've tried to think of some practical ideas of how family hubs could help families. I think they could help in 4 ways: information, education, signposting, and space. Family hubs could signpost parents to organizations that support children with low attendance and their families. They could also signpost to peer-to-peer support groups or to organizations that are stepping stones to going back to school or that offer alternative education. They could help parents write short summaries of their children's needs and how teachers can support them, which parents could then hand out to teachers at the beginning of the school year. Little things like that actually can make a big difference. Family hubs could inform parents on adjustments school can be expected to make so that parents can better advocate for their children. And they could support them in writing EHCP applications in cases where that's relevant. When it comes to EHCPs, it again can be very difficult for parents to know what to advocate for, what support is available. Ideally, family hubs could send a professional to some of the meetings between parents and schools to help think together how a child and a family can be supported for higher school attendance. In my experience, schools react very differently once professionals confirm what parents say. Family hubs could also educate teachers in schools. They could offer short workshops or link schools with organizations that educate schools about adjustments for children who need them, like children who have suffered trauma, are neurodiverse, suffer from chronic pain, and other common conditions. Many of these groups actually need similar adjustments. Family hubs could also support organizations that focus on children with low attendance, for instance, by letting them use their space for free. So there's a lot family hubs could do to support families like mine, and even small things can make a big difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dina. I hope you're listening there at home somewhere, but certainly we'll catch up with it later. But a really valuable experience that Dina's shared there. And I think for me, listening to it as well, it's emotional without being overly emotive, and it's just sort of practically talking that through. And I think one of the things that we talk a lot about in Anna Freud as well is mentalization. It's being able to step in others' shoes, to see things from another perspective. And I think what Dina managed to do there was to really help us to see the world from her child's perspective and from her perspective as well, which can be a really valuable experience. I know she wanted me to mention as well that something she hadn't been able to do, which was think around how schools often feel to young people in similar circumstances that it's a stress test, that they're just constantly trying to reach that next goal, and that can be really difficult and disabling at times. So she's mentioned some possible solutions there as well, so thank you. I'm really excited now to be able to welcome Eliza Fricker there, who has her own website, Missing the Mark, and her own publication. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'll just share my presentation. There we go. Thanks for joining me today. I am Eliza Fricker, author of various books and also known as Missing the Mark, and I'm going to share my presentation from my book, Can't Not Won't. Come and use the space, Lexi. Why is she doing that? It's fine. You can go now. She'll have to learn to get on with it. Hi, I want a toy. Lexi, no, get off. I want a toy. You can't keep making allowances. She's fine when she's here. Do you think we need any HCP? No. September 2019, first and only day of secondary school. We are deeming the day a success. We don't take children like that. This was our life for 8 years, from nursery to the first and only day of secondary school. And most of the narrative was that eventually they would break them in, that they'd eventually be like all the other children, and they'd learn to be like everyone else. But mostly it's they're fine at school, and we were worrying, fussing, too anxious. She's lovely. It'll be okay. Okay? Yeah, sorry, I'm fine. the woman and her child. You okay? Yep, fine. We got courses, parent courses, coffee mornings. I like your dress, thank you. So now when you want them to go to a social occasion like a wedding, they will at least say the right thing. Or you could just not make them go. We got coffee mornings about what an ASC child is like, and we got parenting classes about adding more structure. So now they can say I'm feeling red when they're angry. And at school, our child got offered these sort of things like emotional scaling systems, different coloured faces to point to say how she was feeling. It was even called just right, to really hammer home there was a right and a wrong way to feel in school. So you see, I had a lot of material to draw after 8 years. But I'm being glib. The truth is that this made me feel quite ill, because this was 8 years. And the onus was on us, the mother and the child. But I didn't want more laminated Comic Sans smiley faces for my daughter. So now we're going to talk about our concerns when our children start secondary school. Uniform, homework, weak bladder. So there will be hurdles, but they will learn to cope. I wanted an individualised approach with consistent relationships. What we got was a roller coaster of support, takeaway. And in schools, diagnosis wasn't there to seemingly alter, adapt, or change the environment. It was to show us the best ways we could change our child to fit. Because after all, you can't change the whole system for one child, remember? But the hardest thing was that this went against all my instincts. My daughter was struggling because she was trying so hard to fit an environment that overwhelmed her. She's fine when she's here. I now know this is masking. This is appearing okay because there's not a lot more you can do when you've been made to go to school and you're stuck there now. But most of the time near the end, she was outside the class, like this. She would remove herself from the classroom and sit blank-faced in the corridor and not do anything. No one can learn to regulate on their own or with a smiley face. No one can feel regulated when they don't actually feel safe. Maybe she's happy. Oh, and no, they won't be able to learn or engage when they feel like this. So things at home became quite unbearable in the safe space with their safe person. Here is a morning before school, and this is actually one of probably the most engaged posts that I ever put out on social media. And I think it's because for parents, it's really saying, when we hear, you've got to get them to school, well, just try and get them to school. This is kind of the reality of it. Please, Lexi, get out. Take Inga out. Why is she doing this today? No idea. Shut up. Lexi, please. Sad, hurt, shame, anger. Sad, hurt, shame, anger. You can't do this. Shut up. Everyone has to go to school. It's the law. Shut up. And actually, this is just pressure. This is more pressure on an already pressurized child. And this is more pressure on an already pressurized family. And then in the evenings, the anxiety be so high that the need to control everything. And there'll be huge meltdowns and shutdowns. And for anyone wondering about the impact of this child won't learn to get on with it. This child has had more resilience, and I know there are some that love this word, so I had to get it in, to have endured this every day. And I spoke to a young person about what it was like going into school every day, and they said they felt like they were preparing for war. And often our children are asked what specifically it is about school, and I think this is a nice way of saying really it's not one thing, and it's very difficult to ask our children to unpick that. So what happens when they endure this every day? Trauma. They may eventually break. One parent could become a full-time carer, and that child may be at home for a very long time and struggle to ever return to anything that resembles school. I know this because this was us. This was me. So that's why I started to illustrate and write Missing the Mark, because I became a full-time carer. I had to give up my career. My child was too ill to attend school anymore. So I started drawing to help process the experiences, because when you're under extreme pressure and stress, you can't process it all. And I wanted to share all the guilt and scrutiny parents are put under. I wanted to address the female experience, the parent blame, the mother. I was once asked by a middle-aged white man I'd never met in a meeting if I'd had a traumatic birth, because we're up for anything when our children struggle to go to school. And I wanted to share those maddening, baffling, spectral systems of so-called support, and how we beg and plead to receive an EHCP with language that is unreadable and weird and boring, in the hope that it gives our child more support and understanding. Because that's what we want: understanding, acceptance, flexibility, creativity, and individualized response. But in our case, it didn't really ever come. Have you tried a visual timetable? Did you have a nice half term? I couldn't get her out of the house. Right, so here's a visual timetable and you can use it to plot your week. It was pretty lonely. You can have pictures, make it fun. She hardly spoke. So this is why years on I continue to draw and write, because there is no fix. No amount of laminated sheets can create a solution or outcome. Learning is not attendance, because our children don't need to be fixed. They need a real and true understanding. And once we have this, we stop trying to change our children. If everyone who is working with our children can imagine how things are for them, to really see things from our children's perspective and ours, they will hopefully have the empathetic response needed. Time, relationships, not questionnaires. Do you have any pets? Yes. What do you do at the weekend? Go out. Is mum someone you can talk to? Yes. What makes you worried about school? Don't know. This was also in my book, Can't Not Won't. This was, I think they were a mental health worker and they were attached to the school. And they only came once. They'd never met us before, obviously. We never saw them again, never spoke to them again. And we just asked these questions. They filled in a questionnaire. Now, by this stage, my daughter was not in school, was mute, situationally mute, and was asked these direct questions. And I think this is a really good example of how we can do things better. You know, we're putting this onus on a child to be able to articulate the complexities of an environment and be able to break that down for this adult to feed back to others what it is after meeting them once with extreme anxiety. Now, for a pressure sensitive child to be able to, who wants to say the right thing and feel under that pressure of a stranger, you can see how there's so much wrong with something that maybe other people wouldn't see as wrong. You know, this is someone coming to visit and check on a family. But I can see from this how many things we could do better from this. And if you're thinking, well, you know, there are a lot of families that don't send their children to school, who choose a different route. Well, that's the difficult thing, actually, because actually my daughter wanted to go to school a lot of the time. She loved her friends. This was the last day in year 6, and I knew that was the last, that was the end for us. I knew that leap to secondary school was going to be too much. You see, the thing I really want to share as well is that we're not all kind of lounging around, mucking around, bunking off. like I said, my child wanted to go to school. But I do think that we could have had fewer frustrated emails, less anxiety, less fixing, less masking, less laminating. It could be achievable. And if I'm honest, I don't actually want an EHCP in the realms of education, because I think it narrows that lens. I loathe it all because it's not my daughter, it's not us. I'm not sure anyone will vote for their outfit. No way. I want there to be less of it all, because instead we have an education system that understands and is able to bend and flex and be based on individual strengths. We have learning options. We have different ways that don't require court cases, expensive private reports, special schools. But what about GCSEs? This or this? And on the right-hand side, these are just some different approaches. Did you find a good basketball picture? Here's a postman, draw his fat tummy. Which one would you buy? That looks good. You see all those, there's a young person and an adult. Co-regulation is something I'm a very big supporter of, and that is often missing for our young people. And since starting my blog, I've been overwhelmed by the response from parents and educators. I think there's over 40,000 now on my Facebook page. And here's some of the quotes. I've got Sir Albert Ainsley Green, he's president of the Medical Association there. How much it's resonated with other families, really. And Stephen Porges, who is also, he writes a lot about the polyvagal theory and the impact of the environment on the individual rather than the other way round. And, you know, parents saying, thank you for giving us something most professionals have failed at, hope. So, you know, these connections on Facebook have given families that connection, which they previously don't have. We're very isolated as families. We cannot heal when we are in isolation. And here is us at home. Oh, I've burnt this one. Haha, this is your one then. Cooking pancakes, which became a favourite thing at home when we were healing from our experiences. And this is an illustration of us on the beach. I'm so sad for her that she was let down. She wanted to do the same stuff as her friends, but it's also a relief it's over. We don't have to do all that anymore. Me too. And I just wanted to end. This is from my next book out this year, but this is actually one of the bits of writing I put in the new book about how we healed from those experiences. Healing didn't come from egg timers, access to a sensory diet, a timeout card, meetings or books about autism geniuses, people just like you. Healing didn't come from meetings. Healing didn't come from a home to school book. Healing didn't come from a hub. Healing didn't come from group therapy or a checklist. Healing didn't come from people we only ever saw once. Healing came from watching telly. Healing came from mucking about. Healing came from being together. Healing came from staring out the window. Healing came from pets, slippers, cushions, sofa. Healing came from pancakes. And this is the last school report where my daughter is now at a very different kind of place. It's a trauma-informed, strength-based learning school, and they just said that she's a fabulous addition, asset to the school, academically flying, social skills that are influential, and that's all about changing the environment, and very much one that does not put any pressure on attendance. So part of the importance for my daughter's regulation is being able to regulate herself and know when she is able to go into school and when she feels well enough to go into school. If we had that attendance pressure, then this place wouldn't have worked either. So they're very mindful of that. And actually that's helped with her healing process. She's now very regulated and able to engage when she is able to engage. And that is all. I think my cold just held out before I started coughing there. So thanks.
No, you did brilliantly, and thank you for pushing through with the cold. Eliza, I'm always so moved hearing you speak, and thank you so much for sharing that. I think your illustrations, the way in which you put them together, you sort of, you know, slide half the image out at times as well, there's so much to read within them as well, as what you're able to talk to us about, and particularly thinking about that onus on the child fitting in. And I know from what Margaret was saying earlier that, you know, schools very much, you know, they want to be on board about, you know, what adaptations, you know, what reasonable adjustments do we need to make. I think listening to you and your story and empathizing with that would really help schools, really help family hub teams and all those around them, to be thinking in different ways, looking at it from a different perspective. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Do stay, don't disappear, but just turn your camera off, and I'm going to hand over now to Sally Kendrick, and Sally is the programme manager at the Children, Young People and Families in Plymouth. So I'm really, you know, looking forward to hearing about what you're doing together in that interagency way from a family hub perspective as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to do the beginning. So yes, thank you, Eliza. I mean, it's hugely moving and quite humbling, really, to follow your presentation. My name's Sally Kendrick, and I'm the programme manager for the Family Hubs in Plymouth. And we've heard today about how family hubs can help this agenda, can shift and change. So I'm going to share you some of the things. It's such early work, and there's still a lot to do. So I'm 1 year into this role. I have a background in social work and community development, and I'm also a parent of a child who didn't fit the school mould. So this is a subject that's really close to my own heart and life experience. In Plymouth, we're using the programme to connect together as a family hub family across the city, with all services and communities who are there for children, creating a better fit for children, rather than expecting children and families to fit what we have. Everyone can be involved. People keep asking me, who are the family hubs? And I keep saying, you're the family hub. A true partnership and led approach with children at the heart and parents at the front. We all want the same for children, and we're getting together to achieve this because it's right for children. And no one yet has declined. We've got 75 partners who've already signed up over the last year or so, and that's growing. In developing our family hub approach across the city, we're not setting up new services, but creating collaborations of support through strengthening relationships with children at the heart and families and communities as partners and connectors. Working on the best start for 0 to 3 families, but then extending that through to 25 as we move forward. So building on the best, the Family Hubs train passed through the station a little while ago before I started. It was already an aspiration within Plymouth to develop locally based services that would bring together people around children and families rather than sending children and families out around the city. So it started with a real opportunity to listen and hear what children and families were saying, what they needed, and how they wanted us to behave differently. We spent some time as well trying to really understand, when I first came into post, trying to understand the lived experience of children growing up in the city, what they were telling us, but also what the data told us. So that really helped us to start to build some insight into ways we might interrupt some of the trajectories that children were on that might lead to them having less advantage or having less opportunities than their peers, and thinking about how we could interrupt that journey with our Start for Life offer for the little ones, but also thinking about how we notice problems and challenges that children were facing together, so we could make that an approach that was an acceptable approach where families could ask for help when they need it with people that they trusted. So this Family Hub family we're building on really works those people together to ensure that we're providing the right support early in the places that children live, they learn and they love. This is a piece of work, I'm not going to go into detail because we haven't got time today, but we started to look at what are the things that would start from pregnancy, which would enable children to really maximise the opportunity of learning and developing and making the most of their education. And this really helped us to start to think about what might be the shift we would have to give holistically together on a whole life journey for a child and young person. What are the things that get in the way? What are the critical moments that we could interrupt and enhance and support? So taking that right back to pregnancy. So what we know from data that we gathered is that parents' engagement with education, parents' experience of education, of trauma, of their own life experience, absolutely affects their commitment with their own children, the way that they value or they see education being part and parcel of something that's positive that could enhance their child's life. So there's something about resetting, that's just one example, but resetting some of those experiences so people see education as something that's positive, that we can all involve in, and that can be accessed by a variety of people with really different needs in a variety of different ways. And that helped us to start to think about some of the adaptations we needed to think about for families and for children on their journey through education. We set up this idea. This is sort of one of our sort of flagship slides really for the family hubs in Plymouth. Is what we tend to do is see problems and then think we've got fixes for problems, and that has become quite a culture. I don't think just in Plymouth, but across the country, across probably wider than our country, is the idea that a set of problems are seen and viewed, and then a kind of a fix sought for those problems, which means that we've got a range of services and interventions that have been set up to respond to what's seen as a problem. What we've lost sight of is that needs are complex, that families are complex, that communities are complex, and that if we stop looking at need and start focusing on services, we lose sight of being able to get that right from the very beginning. So what we've introduced with Family Hubs is continuous curiosity, to really be thoughtful about what is it that this is family's experience, really listening to them, really hearing them, really connecting with the children, with the parents, with their community, to get some insight into what are the things that they can bring, that they have strengths in, what are the things that they actually are asking for help and support with, and how do we make our systems adapt to that help and support, not just think we have to fix the problems or find a route to fix the problems. So it's quite difficult to describe this in just a sort of one slide, but I just think what we were doing was putting people on the train, probably putting them on the wrong carriage, on the wrong train, and then they would end up in the wrong destination, at the wrong door for the wrong service. So this is about taking time to really listen, understand, hear what's going on, and then think about how much of this is actual universal adaptation that we need to make, rather than trying to see this as a problem that needs to be fixed. Just using the slides, government quotes around making help something that's really a strength. So seeking out support, and on my own journey of being a parent, there were so many moments that I had to really reach out. I think that we've created a structure, and Family Hubs are trying to break that down, where people think they have to hold on or solve their own problems and challenges. And in reality, parenting is a problem and a challenge every single day. It brings new things, new learning, new thoughts. There's times when we absolutely are singing and coping, and there's times when we're not. And if we see that as a community of people who can come together to support one another, to think together about solutions to some of the challenges, and really encourage and empower people to build on their own strengths, then we may see different outcomes from some of the challenges we see across our city. So the approach we're really looking at is rather than thinking about sending people to find solutions through a system or a pathway, that what we're doing is coming together around children and families, that we're looking at this scaffolding style approach where multi-agency support and team is growing when the family needs more, and then reducing when they need less. Instead of sending people to services, we're inviting individuals from services to come and meet with the family, to connect with the family. So it's a relational model that really builds this system around one another, that we're there to support and pull in on the right people at the right time. So these relationships are key to connecting all together, with an understanding that this is systemic and all parts need to be held in mind for any developments. Knowing the people who will support and drive, and tapping into those champions, coaching and enhancing connectivity across the system supports this way of working. It doesn't exclude families, children, parents, young people, and volunteers. It's a whole inclusive way of working that recognises strengths might be in places we hadn't thought of looking, and actually solutions sometimes come from very simple ideas. So bringing services together to build this family hub family. So the idea is everybody's part of the family hub family in Plymouth, and everybody's welcome. That's children, families, young people, agencies, community sector, voluntary sector. So we're building this idea of one big family that is there to support, to adapt, to enable our children to get the best of what they need. We've looked at this sort of locally as well, because what I did when I was very new in post was have a really strong look at what data we were gathering and what we weren't, what we understood about children's lives, what children were saying about their lives, and how that differentiated between different communities. So this one community approach, this kind of central approach that we have with lots of our services, just doesn't serve those individual communities. It doesn't really change anything for some of the children growing up in some of the areas that are hugely deprived, that have, coming back into the city after 30 years of working away and seeing that those communities are still facing the same challenges. We haven't really changed anything, and it's probably because we haven't been working with those communities. We haven't been working in a way that's enhancing those lived experiences and giving people wider opportunities. So I'm coming to the end, Julie. I've got a minute left, I know. So we use an action learning set for to bring together schools. I'm taking us into the sort of primary pilot that we've developed along this journey. Is we've done an action learning set approach. It's really interesting. When we met with schools, they were asking us for resources, for what they needed, to build on what they had. What we did was we changed that into a reflection of what they already did or had to hand. And it was really interesting because that shifted a whole conversation of the sorts of services they were setting up that were adaptive, that were responsive, from setting up a Lego club in the morning, which was encouraging young people to come into school in the morning, or children to come into school in the morning because they liked Lego, to things that they were doing where they were connecting with volunteer parents from different cultural groups who were coming in to support the children in the classroom. So that brought about a strength-based conversation and celebrated how schools had adapted to the needs of their children. So we've moved forward on developing that as a way of thinking about some of the things that we could do to enhance the offer of schools that didn't require any additional money, but it required a greater network of people around the school supporting and scaffolding that school. So where we've got to now really is we've got around 20 schools that have signed up to be part of this pilot school network. And what we do is connecting them to family hubs to begin with, to build on the relationships that family hubs already have with the network of people working across the city, and to enhance the relationships that the school need to tackle some of the challenges that they're facing as a whole school. So stop thinking about children as a problem, but think about the school finding solutions for the challenges that they're facing. So really shifting that. It really fits with our ordinarily available offer, and we've been working with our education colleagues to make this universal through from early years settings right the way through the school settings. So that's really tied in with our early help strategy in the city, which underpins our family hubs. So just the next phase, we're going to be looking at secondary schools. We've just been looking at primaries to begin with. Our next phase will be secondary schools. Already some great ideas from young people, from a panel of young people we've met, to make things really simple, to make the schools a place where children feel able to talk to the adults around them, engage in the school community, and feel welcomed and responded to in terms of their education. So thank you. Sorry, that was a minute over.
Thank you so much, Sally. And I wasn't wanting to stop you there, just to remind you, I was as a sort of time check, because what you were saying there was so useful and so important. I like those notions of resetting, helping to reset, I guess to reframe, but also you talked about sort of the need for greater networks. And I think that the strength in what you're talking about, very much around the voices of young people, children, young people. How do you also, hear those harder to listen to as well? Those who find it harder to voice, and Eliza, shared that very clearly. And at the same time, building in that nuance that Margaret talked about as well. So if I can call back Margaret and Eliza as well into the space, thank you. Now we only have a few minutes here. We've got one question in the chat, and I think thank you, Hannah Kerr, as well, for putting that in. She works in a primary school. And interestingly, she posted this before your talk, Eliza. So she says here that she was finding that absence is often due to parental anxiety or parenting confidence. And we offer student collections. She works closely with families, with family learning, parent coffee mornings, social groups, workshops. Can you recommend any more that we can do? And I'd really like to think, Hannah, as well, that hearing both Dina and her, Eliza's experience today as well, just that reframing, that rethinking about, where does, if you're feeling that a parent is anxious, where does that come from? What does that relate to? So that aside, let's just sort of focus in there on the question. What else might you recommend? That again, thinking in that family learning space, so that interagency approach, what might be the one thing that has worked for you each, or in the with the organizations that you represent? Let me start with Margaret. Is there something there that you might recommend that schools could do?
I mean, I think a lot of schools try to go to the fix quite quickly because they feel the pressure to fix. So I think that's been said a few times, and it's instantly felt that parental engagement and reaching out is, more coffee mornings, more activity. And actually that's the overwhelm, and that's not necessarily. But I think one of the things that we've been talking about much more with schools is parental knowledge, like really understanding how school works in a really gentle initiation. So when transitions are really, really important, and preparing for those really well, but not in that sort of tick box fashion, actually bending to the needs of that family. So I think that parental knowledge for me, rather than parental engagement, comes first.
So thank you very much, Margaret. Eliza, what are you thinking in this space?
Yeah, I really like that. And I also think that trying to take as much of that pressure off, because I think what happens is it becomes a cycle. Parents feel under enormous pressure to get their children there and to attend. And actually, we need to reduce that pressure, because that pressure then feeds into the child. So reducing that, is it important? Mornings particularly, like we said, transitions are very tricky. Even knowing it's okay if you're late immediately takes the pressure off. So reducing that pressure as much as is possible, and thinking, I know people get very kind of nervous around things like one-to-one support, because people immediately think kind of TAs, teaching assistants, and the cost. But actually, when we talk about it more in co-regulation, who is that safe person for that child in school, and who can they access? that access needs to very much be a very fluid thing, a very organic thing. A timeout card is going to put more attention and pressure on that already pressure sensitive child, but is there somewhere that they can just access, or is there someone that can come and check on them under the guise of it being a job? For example, can you help me do some paper shredding? So it's all very subtle, but that person could be someone that's always in the office, or the caretaker, someone that doesn't have that hierarchy, that again will put more pressure on that child. If they're perhaps a teacher, they will immediately feel pressured with them. So someone who's just going to be around and present for them, and give them that co-regulation that will make them feel really safe.
Thank you, Eliza. Really helpful. Sally, anything that you're thinking of?
Sort of lots. I'm trying to sort of filter it through, but one of the things that's really struck me by working with school is the sort of hidden heroes in the school, and I feel like you need to notice them as a school system, because the people that we met with generally who wanted to make a difference to families were the teaching assistants, were the Senkos, were the people who might be more quieter in the school setup but are more available and connecting. And those people were the people who were showing the greatest creativity and the greatest insight into what was working in schools and what wasn't. So, but having less of a voice in the school system. So I would say, you know, talk to your parents and talk to others, but you will have people in schools who probably have those relationships already, who could provide more insight into how the school culture might be adapted or might work better for more children. That's really helpful. I love that notion of hidden heroes as well. So thank you, Sally, very much. And coming back into that family hub sort of topic, that notion, you know, everything that we've already learned today, you know, we've got Holly here on the question saying, you know, can she share this video with her educational mental health practitioner team, for example? And I think, you know, there is such a strong place for family hubs to be initiating training around this, but also to be sharing it, to be co-writing it with parents, with families, with young people as well. And I think as well, for me, it's thinking about I suppose attendance, but really sort of building some of those patterns from very early on. And often, you know, even at a preschool age, where family hubs will really have that in with families, often, you know, some of those difficulties, some of those challenges can already arise, and it's about knowing early, that knowledge that Margaret talked about as well. So thank you so much, all of you. I'm afraid we don't have any time for more questions, but so much. But as I said earlier, I really want this conversation to be just the start and to keep this going. So thank you very much for the three of you, and to Dina as well today. And I want to move us on. We've got a video now, just before we start our conversation, with Brenda McHugh, who's a consultant psychotherapist and founder of the Pears School. If you haven't heard of it, then do find out some more. But also Hannah Tippler, who's the Deputy Service Manager for the Wellbeing and Emotional Support Team at Brent. But we're going to start this session just with a video from a parent who's actually at Pears, whose child went to Pears School, or goes to work at Pears School.
Pears Family School restored faith in humanity for Oma and myself. I began to socialize again, to trust people again, to have faith again. And then slowly, Oma also started believing in that, because he saw Mummy being engaged, and how the adults here, I mean, oh my God, the adults, the professionals here are so well trained and so thought out and very mindful of our sensitivity, our lives, our faith, and Oma's difficulties. And I think that's been the success of Pears Family School, is being able to have this relationship with the parents, and then that translates to the children. I had no idea that Oma actually builds relationship through me. So he sees Mummy trusting people, and then he begins to trust the teachers.
Thank you. If I can ask Brenda and Hannah to join us on the screen as well. I have to say I've watched that video now so many times, and each time I just find it so moving. And I think it's in a way it's so obvious, isn't it, around relationships. It is about building relationships through a child, through their parent, and if they can build trust, then the child can build trust. So let's just start with that. Brenda and Hannah, welcome. Tell me a little bit more about I guess what those words mean for you and in the context of your work.
Yes.
I'll start with you, Brenda.
Thank you, Julie, and hello, everybody. Yes, so I'm co-founder of the Pears Family School, and as Latifa said, our recognition that unless we work together with parents and de-isolate, and I think as Margaret talked about, share knowledge, then we are not going to gain the trust of the children, because as Latifa said, her son watched her very carefully, and as she began to have confidence again, so he was able to try a little harder and to risk a bit more because the trust was there. So if I just give you a tiny kind of hint of what we're thinking about, is that we know, and this is where family hubs I think are absolutely vital, that with exclusion or children feeling unable to step through the door of schools, we have something called social thinning, and that is very toxic. So the social thinning means that the children do not get enough experience of being with other people, other brains, other ideas. But that's also the same for parents, because as people feel, as they've explained today and every day to us, shamed and have fewer options, then the social thinning happens for the family as well, which means that you are trapped in a system where you have very, very little options. So by bringing all our families into our school and the parents being together, not just coffee mornings, but sharing data, sharing information, and that's not parent training. That's not what we do. So if I tell you what's happening this morning, we're looking at, with our 30 parents and some of our TAs working together, what have we learned about motivation? What do we understand about how some children respond to rewards and some don't? What's the neuroscience behind that? And then from that, there'll be stuff that parents will try at home, and stuff that we'll try in school. But by working together, we increase, if I can use that word, the dosage around the child, so that with trusted people, they are hearing a common language and they're seeing a common pathway in which the adults and parents and the adults of the school and the parents are working together to help them make that very tentative next step and to reward that process. So in a nutshell, thanks, Julie, that's kind of what we're trying to do. And we're trying to share that with as many people as possible.
That's brilliant. And I remember a visit a little while ago to the Pears School, and you were running a session, and the parents were rubbing hand cream onto their child's hands, and actually, for one parent was recognizing that the child found that very sensitive, was oversensitized to that, and actually took his shoes off with his permissions, took his shoes off and socks off and did it on his feet, and he was just so content within that, and that struck me in this context well, because it's the sort of things that family hubs do so well with lots of their children and families together. And actually, again, it's sort of, I guess, almost like stretching that universal provision that Margaret was talking about. It's stretching what we do and building that context. Hannah, over to you. What are you thinking about?
I think what I wanted to say just was kind of building on what Brenda was talking about. So my role is I work in an early intervention team in Brent, and we're looking at how we can support families whose children are having trouble accessing school to return to school. I just really wanted to pick up on what Brenda said about strengthening relationships, and I've been particularly touched by Eliza's presentation today, and it made me think of the pressure that parents are under, and how Brenda was talking about, really, and in the video, about parents developing trust in school again. And I was thinking about a family that I worked with, where the young person was really having difficulty accessing school. And I recognised so many of the things from Eliza's presentation. You know, school was very anxious about the young person coming back, and there was a lot of, well, we don't see it in school, and there was a lot of the narratives that Eliza has so clearly demonstrated. And I remember sitting in a meeting, and a school professional who was responsible for the alternative provision turned to the parent and said, "It's okay, we've got your child's education, you just need to return to being a parent." And I watched the parents' shoulders drop and the relief on their face. And that's what I think Eliza has been talking about, you know, in that, you know, there's so much responsibility on parents. And Bill, one of the things we're working on in our intervention that is about this idea of shared responsibility for the child coming back to school, and thinking about advocating for the child, but also thinking about the school's role in that and the parents' role in that, and kind of bringing those things together so that we can do. Ultimately, returning to school would be ideal, but for some children that's not possible. But enabling the child to access an education that is right for them, you know, again, as Eliza's managed to access for her child.
No, absolutely. And I think that's where Molly started us, wasn't it? With thinking about that, where that's individualized. Sorry, Brenda, I cut across. Over to you.
No, I was just really thinking about what Hannah's saying and everything that we've heard, that I'm really hoping that what you can do with family hubs is strengthen the system around the child and the family, because otherwise you have not got a sustainable system. So I think that some of the, you know, we're trying to think systemically here, that if all we do is, as Eliza has so brilliantly pointed out, small interventions where we don't have the hands and the care around the child with the family involved in that, as soon as, say, that brilliant professional in the school leaves or the child moves on, the child is alone again. But if we're sharing information and we're sharing strategies, then we've built a sustainable system that can continue. There's so many times in which my life has both been in NHS and in schools, but where you see brilliant work happening in school, but it doesn't translate. So the child does not have, they rely on that one person, but we haven't built the sustaining system. And I think, you know, family hubs seem to have, from what I'm hearing, the most amazing opportunity to really strengthen that, but not just strengthen it in the work that you do, but in that narrative, because I think we tend to work in silos. And what family hubs are doing is thinking systemically, bringing everybody together with that.
Yeah.
I really liked what the diagram that Sally shared with the circles, with the family hubs pulling everybody in together. I guess that's kind of what my team are trying to do in the sort of multi-agency work that we're doing, but we're working very much in individual cases. And what we're talking about here is a more strategic approach, where family hubs have this opportunity, as Brenda said, to pull all the services in towards them and around the child, rather than the child accessing those services individually.
Yeah, Margaret started us off thinking about Brock and Brenner. Again, if you want to sort of check that out at some point, but that idea of the ecosystem, exactly that, the child at the centre. And Margaret shared another model with us as well. Ainsley, sorry. But I think just trying to think around, we know that special needs, children with special educational needs and disabilities, for example, there's a strong interrelationship between SEND and persistent absence. And we know many of those individual stories, but we don't necessarily have a systemic understanding, as Brenda's sort of saying, or a response to redress this pattern. I just wonder whether, you know, what might you need, or what do you already achieve? What do you have already that where you're starting to make those systemic changes, as opposed to, you know, just like individual solutions, if you like?
I mean, for us in the school, I think it has to start with a co-constructed idea of what the child needs and what the family needs, and starting so that we're on the same page, rather than having a diagnosis that maybe doesn't fit what the family's experience is, and that then may not be able to be delivered. So we spend quite a bit of time co-constructing what the needs are, what the roles and responsibilities are, and then from then how we're going to work together. And this isn't, you know, a lifetime thing. This is time limited, of course, but I think that that's been the success of Pears Family School, in that by right from the beginning, not working in silos, but making a team together and continuing to work together. And then, you know, a lot of our families, our parents still come back. They'll be back this morning talking to new parents about what they've learned and the importance of them being able to continue to teamwork with other professionals as their child has needed that going forward. So I don't have a kind of magic answer to that, Julie, except for really sort of banging the drum about this is going to sound odd, but I think there's quite a bit of anxiety about working in partnership with parents. And I think we need to break down some of that anxiety so that it's not, it doesn't put people off building this incredible sustainable team around the child.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. Hannah, one last comment.
I really just, again, developing on what from what Brenda said, the shared conversations are so important. And there isn't a magic answer, because all the children are so different. But one of the I'm bringing it back to an individualized case, but one of the things that was really successful in an intervention was working in partnership with the SENCO and the parent and the young person to really understand the young person's needs. And then that young person's needs, the young person actually constructed their own sort of pupil passport that was then shared with all the staff, and you know, the young person actually became quite well known in the school as he became the autism ambassador, and you know, and his relationship to school completely changed because of that understanding of his particular needs that actually was very much part of his identity. And you know, so I guess that's really just building on what Brenda has said about the importance of those conversations and that shared information.
No, that's really lovely, and thank you so much, Brenda and Hannah, for being with us this morning and entering into this conversation. And as you know, for all of you, this is just hopefully the start of a conversation. If you'd like to continue to work together on this topic, with a view to hopefully completing a resource that's useful to family hubs, to schools, and to families equally, then please, we'll be in touch with you so that you know how to get back in touch with us. Thank you to all our speakers this morning. You've got a feedback form in the chat, in the Q&A, in the chat, that we'd love you to feedback. Thank you to Zara and to Molly. Thank you to Margaret and to Eliza. Thank you to Dina and to Sally, and of course again to Hannah and Brenda. I hope it's been useful for you this morning. We will get back on the Q&A to anything that we've not been able to respond to, but I really hope that you found it as valuable as I have this morning. So thank you again, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.